Have you ever had a feeling deep in your bones, a quiet hum beneath the noise of the engine, that you were about to drive straight into a moment that would change your life forever? A feeling that the endless stretch of highway ahead wasn't just leading to another town, but to a crossroads in your own soul. My name is Jack, and for 22 years, this 18-wheeler has been my home, my office, and my whole world. I'm a long-haul trucker out of Texas, and the road is the only thing that's ever made sense to me. The simple rhythm of it. You pick up the cargo, you put in the miles, you drop it off. Day in, day out. This particular run was no different. I was hauling machine parts from El Paso to Phoenix, a load so ordinary I'd already forgotten what was in the trailer. It was just another job, another paycheck. Another 1,000 miles of watching the world go by through a pane of glass. The sun was bleeding all purple and orange across the Arizona sky, that kind of beautiful, lonely sunset you only see in the desert. The heat was finally starting to break, but you could still see it shimmering off the asphalt, making the distant horizon dance and blur. There's a hypnosis to driving out here in the American Southwest, the sheer emptiness of it all. The road unspools in front of you like a long black ribbon, and the sheer scale of the landscape makes you feel impossibly small. Have you ever felt that way, like you're the only person left on the planet? For hours, the only sound had been the steady drone of my Cummins engine, a low growl that's more comforting to me than any music. The classic country station I'd been listening to had faded to static 100 miles back, leaving me alone with my thoughts. And on that day, my thoughts were mostly about nothing. The price of diesel, the lukewarm coffee I'd had at the last stop, the long week of driving that still lay ahead. It was the kind of grinding routine that can wear a man down, making one day blend into the next until you're not sure where the road ends and you begin. You get comfortable in that loneliness. You start to believe you know exactly what's around the next bend, because it's always the same. More rock, more sand, more empty sky. You think you're in control, that your whole world exists between the white lines on the pavement. But the desert has its secrets. And the highway, well, the highway has a way of testing you when you least expect it. Stick with me until the end of this, because what you're about to discover is that the most dangerous things in this world don't always come at you with a roar. Sometimes they just appear, quiet and desperate, on the side of a forgotten road. I was just a man doing my job, tired, bored, and counting down the miles. I had no idea that I was about to be pulled into a story of corruption, of twisted faith, and a truth so dark could get us both buried in the sand. My routine was about to be shattered, and it all started with a single, solitary figure I saw shimmering in the distance. At first she was just a flicker, a heat shimmer off the asphalt that my tired eyes almost dismissed as a mirage. But as my 18-wheeler ate up the distance, the shimmer took shape. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was a person. A woman, standing there on the shoulder like she'd sprung from the baked earth itself. Every alarm bell in my head, every lesson learned over 2 decades of lonely nights and questionable truck stops, started screaming, "You don't stop. You never stop for a stranger in the middle of nowhere." It's the first rule of the road for a reason. It's how you stay safe, how you avoid trouble, how you make it to the next town in one piece. My hand was steady on the wheel. My foot was steady on the gas. My brain was telling me to keep driving, to treat her like another cactus, another piece of scenery in this vast, empty landscape. But then there's that other voice, isn't there? The one that's quieter. A gut feeling, a nudge from somewhere deep inside that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And it makes me wonder, have you ever been in a situation like that? A moment where your gut told you to do something that your brain screamed was a bad idea. If this story is hitting a nerve with you, if you know that feeling, do me a favor and leave a comment down below. Just sharing what part of this is connecting with you helps more than you know. It lets me know that these stories, these real-life moments of choice, are worth telling. And if you could take a second to hit that like button and maybe subscribe to the channel, it sends a signal that this is the kind of content that matters. Your support is genuinely what keeps this engine running and helps these stories reach people who might need to hear them. It builds a real community right here on this digital highway, and I appreciate every single one of you for that dot. So there I was, caught in that split second that felt like an hour. My foot, against all common sense, eased off the accelerator. The roar of the engine softened. The whole world seemed to go still and silent, waiting to see what I would do. As I got closer, I could see she wasn't looking for a handout. She was just standing there, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion, clutching a simple, worn-out backpack to her chest as if it held the most precious thing in the world. Her clothes were dark with sweat, and her face was etched with a desperation. Back cut right through the dusty windshield and grabbed hold of something in my chest. Something I thought the road had worn out of me a long time ago. My professional instinct was yelling at me to floor it, but my heart, my gut, it was doing something else entirely. It was hitting the brakes. The hiss of the air brakes was deafening. In the sudden quiet. It's a sound I've heard a million times, but this time it felt different. It felt final. My rig, all 80,000 pounds of it, groaned to a stop, kicking up a cloud of fine red dust that swirled in my headlights. 4. A long moment, she just stood there, frozen on the shoulder, as if she couldn't believe this mountain of steel had actually stopped for her. I could see her face more clearly now. She was young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair stuck to her forehead and eyes that were wide with a mix of fear and sheer raw exhaustion. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, clutching that backpack like a lifeline. I reached over and flicked the lock on the passenger door. The click echoed in the cab, a small sound that marked a massive decision. A point of no return dot, she pulled the heavy door open and climbed inside, moving with a weary urgency. The door slammed shut, and suddenly my world, my safe, isolated world, had shrunk to the space of this cab, now filled with the smell of desert. Dust, sweat, and an unspoken tension, so thick you could taste it. She didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead, watching the empty road as if the demons chasing her were still out there in the twilight. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper, brittle and dry. Just to the next town, please. No questions, that was it. Not where she came from, not what she was running from. Just a destination and a plea for silence. I should have told her to get out. I should have asked for ID, for a story that made sense, for anything other than this chilling mystery. But I didn't. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I put the truck in gear, and we pulled back onto the highway, the silence between us heavier than any cargo I had ever hauled. This was no longer just a drive. This was the start of a new journey, and the truth of it was sitting right beside me, hidden inside a worn leather backpack. The impact of that single choice, to stop, was already settling over me like a shroud. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because it wasn't just about giving someone a ride. The moment that door closed, there was a fundamental transformation. In my reality, my mindset had to shift instantly from the passive, half-asleep state of a long-haul driver to something else entirely. Something hyper-aware. Every flicker of headlights in my rearview mirror felt like a threat. Every shadow on the side of the road looked like a person lying in wait. The familiar comfort of my cab was gone, replaced by the electric hum of danger. She sat like a statue, her knuckles white where she gripped the straps of her bag. That bag was the center of it all. It was a black box, a Pandora's box, and the hidden truth it contained was radiating outwards, poisoning the air between us. I've spent a lifetime on the road, and I've learned that the most important part of any trip isn't the cargo or the destination. It's the decisions you make along the way. We see the big, dramatic choices in movies, but life is often defined by the small, quiet ones. The decision to stop. The decision to listen to your gut instead of your head. These are the moments that reveal what's really going on behind the scenes of our own lives. As we drove on into the growing darkness, the desert I knew so well seemed to change. The mesas and buttes that usually looked majestic now looked like silent, menacing judges watching us pass. The journey was no longer about miles and hours. It was about survival. It was about the weight of her unspoken story and the terrifying revelation that I was now a part of it, whether I liked it or not. The road ahead was dark, and for the first time in a long time, I had no idea what was coming. If you know what it feels like to make a choice that changes everything, comment. Every choice matters down below. We drove for what felt like an eternity, maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. Time had lost its meaning. The only clock was the sun dipping lower, painting the sky in darker, more bruised colors. The silence in the cab was a living thing. It was full of questions I couldn't ask and answers she couldn't give. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind was racing. Every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. My hands were slick on the steering wheel, and a cold knot was tightening in my gut. This was more than just a woman in trouble. This was something else, something dangerous. And I was driving us straight into the heart of it. And then I saw it. Up ahead, where the road curved around a dark mesa, a shape was blocking the lane. At first, I thought it was a stalled car, maybe a deer. But as we got closer, my headlights picked out the details. It was a pickup truck, an old, beaten-up Ford, parked sideways across the road. Its lights were off. It sat there in the darkness, like a predator waiting in ambush. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a breakdown. This was a roadblock. Before I could even process the threat, Elena gasped. It was a sharp, terrified sound that cut through the silence like a knife. I glanced at her. Her face was pale, a mask of pure terror in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. She wasn't looking at the truck. She was looking at me, her eyes wide with a horrifying understanding. Her hand shot out and gripped my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh with surprising strength. "They're not here for you," she said, her voice shaking but full of a desperate certainty. "They're here for me. Don't let them get this." Her other hand fumbled with the buckle on her backpack. With trembling fingers, she pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound book. A journal. It looked ancient, the kind of thing you'd see in a museum, but the way she held it, pressed against her chest like a shield, you could tell it was more valuable than gold. It was the reason for all of this, the source of her fear. And now, it was my problem too. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this was the moment of revelation. This was the point where the entire journey, my entire reality, underwent a violent transformation. My mindset had to shift in a split second from a guy doing a favor to a man in a firefight, even if no shots had been fired yet. The hidden truth of the situation was no longer hidden. It was sitting right there on her lap, bound in worn leather. The bastidors, the behind-the-scenes of her terror, were suddenly floodlit right in my cab. This wasn't random violence or a simple carjacking. This was targeted. This was a hunt. And the full impact of my decision to stop for her was crashing down on me with the force of a physical blow. The journey had irrevocably changed. I was no longer a bystander who had stumbled into something. My choice to open that door made me a player, a shield. The stakes of this sudden, terrifying game were no longer abstract. They were life and death. Two figures stepped out from behind the pickup. They were just silhouettes at first, framed by the faint glow of the rising moon. They didn't wave their arms. They didn't yell or make any sudden moves. They just started walking towards us, slow and deliberate. Their movements were calm, confident, and utterly terrifying. They knew we had nowhere to go. The road behind us was miles of empty darkness, and the desert on either side was a treacherous sea of rock and cactus. They were closing in, the crunch of their boots on the gravel getting louder, closer with every beat of my heart. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked from the approaching men to the journal in her hands, then back, to the unblinking, dark shapes walking into my headlights. Every instinct I had, every ounce of self-preservation, was screaming at me to stop the truck, throw my hands up, and give them whatever they wanted. I was a trucker, not a hero. But that little book, and the desperate woman holding it, had become my cargo. And I never failed to deliver my cargo. If you feel that moment of truth in your gut, comment, "The truth has a price," down below. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The two men were 30 yards away and closing. I could see their faces now, hard and empty. They weren't here to talk. They were here to collect, and we were the collection. In that single stretched out second, my whole life, my whole 22 years on the road, boiled down to one simple, impossible choice. I could stop, hand over the woman and her journal, and drive away. I could pretend I never saw a thing, just another strange tale for a lonely highway. Or I could push the throttle to the floor. I looked at Elena, her face a silent scream, clutching that little book like it was her very soul. And in that moment, she wasn't a stranger anymore. She was my cargo, and I do not fail my deliveries. My foot didn't just press the accelerator. I stomped on it like I was trying to push it through the floorboards. The engine didn't roar. It bellowed. All the power of that Cummins diesel exploded to life, and the truck lurched forward not with speed, but with unstoppable, earth-shaking force. I yanked the wheel hard to the right, aiming for a section of old barbed wire fence that looked rusted and weak. The men's faces changed from confident to shocked. They jumped back as the massive chrome grille of my rig swung towards them. We left the pavement with a bone-jarring slam that threw us both against our seatbelts. The smooth hum of the highway was replaced by the violent, crashing thunder of my truck tearing through the desert scrub. Branches scraped and screeched against the side of the cab. Rocks kicked up by the tires hammered against the undercarriage. The whole world became blur of dust and shaking metal. The sound of the fence giving way was a sharp, screeching groan of twisting metal and snapping wood. And then we were through. We were on a rough, unpaved service road I'd only ever glimpsed from the highway. The ride was brutal. The cab was bucking like a wild horse, and I fought the wheel just to keep us moving in a straight line. Behind us, I heard the squeal of tires as the pickup truck spun around, its own engine roaring in fury. The chase was on. But this wasn't the highway anymore. This was my world. They had a light, fast pickup, but I had 80,000 pounds of American steel, and I knew how to use it. I knew its weight, its momentum, its every groan and shudder. They were faster on the straightaways, but the service road was all sharp turns and loose gravel. On the first sharp bend, I let the trailer drift wide, sending a massive wave of dirt and rock showering down on them, forcing them to fall back. I could see their headlights in my mirror, cutting through the dust cloud I was creating. Two angry eyes getting smaller, then bigger as they fought to keep up. This wasn't a chase of speed. It was a brutal dance of weight and desperation. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because that split-second decision to leave the road was a complete transformation of my identity. My mindset had to evolve in an instant. I was no longer just a trucker. I was a fugitive. I was a shield. That one action, that violent turn of a wheel, had a permanent impact that I could feel in my very DNA. This entire journey had been thrust upon me, but the decision to fight back was mine alone. This was the moment the hidden truth became my truth. The bastidors of this conflict were no longer something I was just observing. I was now part of the machinery, a gear grinding against another. This was a revelation not of information, but of character. I discovered a part of myself I didn't know existed, a man who wouldn't just roll over when things got tough. The man who drove onto that service road was not the same man who had been counting down the miles an hour before. I had crossed a line, and the only way forward was through the chaos. There was no turning back. The road behind me was gone forever. If you understand that feeling of crossing a point of no return, comment "no turning back" down below. I drove like a man possessed, pushing the truck harder than I ever had before. The service road twisted and turned, a forgotten vein running through the dark heart of the desert. I finally lost their headlights in a thick cloud of dust after a particularly nasty turn. I didn't slow down. I kept going for another 10 minutes, adrenaline singing in my veins until I was sure we were alone. I saw a shape loom up in the darkness ahead, a small, dilapidated building set back from the dirt road. It was an old church, a tiny adobe chapel with a crooked wooden cross on its roof, a relic from a time when people traveled this road with horses and prayers. On instinct, I swerved behind it, pulling the truck into the deep shadows cast by the crumbling walls, and caught the engine. The sudden silence was absolute. The only sound was the frantic heaving of my own breath and the ticking of the cooling engine. We were hidden. We were safe for now. I turned to Elena. She was still clutching the journal, her face streaked with dust, but the raw terror in her eyes had been replaced by a kind of grim resolve. She knew I had just signed my own death warrant for her, and the time for secrets was over. She looked at me, her eyes meeting mine for the first time, and I could see the full weight of her burden in them. "You deserve to know what you just did," she said, her voice steady now. "You need to know what's in this book." She opened the leather-bound journal, its pages worn and filled with a tight, neat script. It wasn't just a diary. It was a ledger. A detailed, damning record of a criminal empire hiding in plain sight. Page after page laid out a massive corruption scheme, a web of deceit woven by two powerful men. One was a businessman, a ruthless operator who owned half the valley and ruled the other half through fear. The other, the man at the center of it all, was a preacher, a charismatic, silver-tongued man who ran a sprawling megachurch, one of those places with a coffee shop in the lobby and a rock band on the stage. He preached about hope and salvation to thousands every Sunday, all while running a modern-day slavery ring behind the scenes. She explained it all, her voice low and intense in the darkness of the cab. They were using the church as a front, a so-called faith-based charity, to lure in undocumented workers with promises of food, shelter, and a path to citizenship. Once they were inside, it was a prison. They took their papers, paid them nothing, and worked them to the bone on the businessman's farms and factories. It was all there in the journal. Dates, names, bank transfers showing how they laundered the money, funneling it through church accounts and offshore holdings. It was a truth so ugly, so profoundly evil, it was hard to believe. And Elena, she had been one of them. She had worked in the church's office, had seen the books, had witnessed the cruelty firsthand. This journal wasn't just evidence. It was her testimony. It was the voice for all the people they had silenced. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this was the moment of the great revelation. This was when the true stakes of this journey became terrifyingly clear. The impact of what was happening went far beyond a simple chase in the desert. This was a battle between good and evil being fought in the shadows of our own country. The hidden truth in that journal represented a complete perversion of faith, a weaponization of hope. The bastidors of this preacher's empire were a nightmare of exploitation and greed. This knowledge triggered a profound transformation in me. The fight was no longer just about protecting one woman. It was about protecting the very idea of what's right. My mindset had to shift again, from fugitive to guardian. I was the guardian of this terrible secret, this truth that could either set people free or get us both killed. This journey was no longer about getting to the next town. It was about getting this book into the right hands, no matter the cost. The abandoned chapel around us seemed to hold its breath, a silent witness to the weight of the truth that had just been passed into my care. If you believe that some truths are worth fighting for, comment "The truth is worth it" down below. The weight of her words hung in the air in the cab, heavier than the desert heat. An entire empire of evil, built on stolen hope and hidden behind a cross. I felt like I couldn't breathe. And just when I thought the silence couldn't get any heavier, I heard it. A low crunch of tires on gravel, coming down the service road. It was faint at first, then grew steadily louder. They'd found where we'd left the highway. They were coming. My heart hammered against my ribs. I killed what few dashboard lights were on, plunging us into near total darkness. "We have to move," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Now, into the chapel. It's our only chance." We slipped out of the truck, the doors closing with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. We scrambled through the dust to the crumbling church. The door moaned open on rusted hinges, and we slipped inside. The air was thick with the smell of decay and old, dry wood. The place was gutted, with only a few broken pews and a simple stone altar at the front. A single beam of moonlight lanced down from a hole in the roof, illuminating a million dancing dust motes. We ducked down behind the altar, our backs pressed against the cold stone, and held our breath. Moments later, the powerful beams of flashlights cut through the broken windows, slicing through the darkness. The beams swept across the empty space, pausing on the broken pews, the dirt floor. I could hear their footsteps outside, slow and methodical, crunching on the gravel. I risked a quick peek over the altar. They were standing by my truck, too. Dark figures. One of them ran his flashlight over the still-warm grill, then pointed towards the chapel. My blood turned to ice. They knew we were here. They were coming in. We were trapped. There was no back door, no escape. Just crumbling adobe walls and the ghosts of old prayers. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, her hand gripping my arm so tight, I thought the bone would snap. This was it. The end of the road. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because what happened next is something I still can't fully explain. It's a moment that forced a complete transformation of my understanding of the world. My entire mindset, built on a lifetime of tangible things, of diesel and steel and asphalt, was about to be shattered. This was a revelation that went beyond the journal, beyond the corruption of men. This was a glimpse into the bastidors of Orf. Reality itself, a look at a hidden truth that operates on a level we can't comprehend. The impact of the next 30 seconds would forever alter the course of my journey, proving that sometimes the most critical decisions are not made by us at all, but for us, by forces we can't even begin to name. It was a moment that defied logic, defied reason, and defied everything I thought I knew about how the world worked. Just as one of them put his hand on the chapel door, a sound crackled through the silence. It was static, and it was coming from inside my truck. I froze. The CB radio. But that was impossible. The truck was off, the battery disconnected from that system years ago. I hadn't used it in a decade. The cord was frayed, and unplugged. Yet, the static grew louder, a rough, hissing sound filling the night. And then, through the static, a voice. It wasn't loud. It was a whisper, a single, clear word that seemed to be spoken right into my ear. Go. At the very instant the word was whispered, the world outside exploded. A sudden, violent gust of wind slammed into the chapel, rattling the old structure to its foundations. A wall of sand and dust, a freak storm out of nowhere, engulfed the area. The flashlight beams vanished into a thick, swirling vortex of brawn. I could hear the men shouting in confusion and anger, their voices instantly swallowed by the roar of the wind. Pilana's eyes flew open, wide with shock and awe. It was our chance. It was a miracle. I didn't wait to understand it. I grabbed her hand, and we scrambled out from behind the altar, bursting through the side door and into the blinding chaos of the dust storm. We ran, not back towards the road, but away, deeper into the dark, unforgiving desert, with the wind at our backs, erasing our footprints as we went. If you've ever felt a force you can't explain, comment, "I believe in the whispers," down below. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like lead. The dust storm was a godsend, a chaotic cloak that hid us from our pursuers. We had no idea where we were going, only that we had to get away from the road, away from my truck. It was a tombstone back there now, a monument to the life I used to have. When the wind finally died down, we were miles from where we started, lost in the vast, silent darkness of the desert. We had nothing. No water, no food, no truck. Just the clothes on our backs and the journal, which Elena still held like a sacred text. I should have felt hopeless, but I didn't. That whisper in the chapel, the impossible wind, it had changed something in me. I wasn't just a man caught in a bad situation anymore. I felt like I was part of something bigger, a soldier in a war one was just beginning to understand. Elena had a plan, a desperate, long-shot plan, but it was all we had. There was an investigative journalist she was supposed to meet, a contact she had made weeks ago. He was waiting in a small town about 30 miles east. If we could get to him, if we could get him the journal, he could blow the whole thing wide open. 30 miles, on foot, through the desert at night. It was a suicide mission, but it was our only mission. So we walked. We stumbled through ravines, climbed over rocks, and pushed through thorny brush with the moon as our only guide. Elena was tougher than she looked. She never complained, never slowed down, her focus locked on that single goal. After what felt like a lifetime, we saw the faint glow of lights on the horizon. The town. Hope surged through me, a powerful, intoxicating wave. We were going to make it. We found the all-night diner where the meet was supposed to happen. It was a small, dusty place that smelled of stale coffee and grease. We slid into a booth in the back, exhausted, filthy, and on edge. We waited. But the journalist never came. Instead, the diner door opened and 2 men walked in, not the men from the roadblock. These men were different. They wore clean, neat clothes and had the blank, professional eyes of security guards. They didn't even look around. They walked straight to our booth. One of them smiled, a thin, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The preacher sends his regards," he said quietly. He'd like to have a word. My heart sank like a stone. They had been waiting. For us, they knew. The whole thing had been a trap. There was no fight left in us. We were cornered and captured, our desperate journey ending not with a bang, but with a quiet, polite invitation into hell. They took us to the megachurch. It was a massive, sprawling compound on the edge of town, lit up like a beacon in the desert night. They separated me from Elena and led me down a long white corridor to a large office. And there he was, The preacher. He was exactly as I'd pictured him. Handsome, charismatic, with a smile that could charm a snake off a rock. He stood up from behind a desk bigger than my first apartment and offered me his hand. "Jack," he said, his voice as smooth as Tennessee whiskey, "I'm so glad we can finally talk. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this confrontation was the ultimate test. This was the moment where the entire journey, all the choices and all the fear, came to a head. The impact of this meeting was designed to be a complete psychological assault. This wasn't about fists. It was about faith. My faith in what was right versus his twisted version of it. This was the final revelation, a look into the very heart of the man behind the curtain. The hidden truth was that he didn't see himself as a villain. In his mind, he was a shepherd, and I was just a lost sheep who had wandered into the wolf's den. This was a battle for my mindset. He was trying to break my resolve, not with threats, but with reason, with temptation. He motioned for me to sit. He leaned back in his leather chair, the picture of calm authority. "You're a working man, Jack," he said, his voice full of false empathy. "A man who understands how the world works. You move things from one place to another. You provide a service. That's all I do. I provide a service, a little hope, a little order. You don't need this crusade. It's not your fight." He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope, sliding it across the polished desk. "Leave the girl, leave the book, and go. Chalk it up to a strange night in the desert. No one will ever bother you again. This is your chance to just walk away. If you believe that some things are not for sale, comment 'My integrity is not for sale' down below." I stared at the envelope. It was thick with cash. Enough to buy a new rig, enough to quit driving for a year, enough to make all of this go away. All I had to do was stand up, take the money, and walk out the door. My mind was screaming at me to take it. It was the logical choice, the safe choice. Who was I to take on this guy? He was an emperor in his own kingdom. I was just a trucker, a nobody who had stumbled into something way over his head. I looked up from the money and met his eyes. They were calm, confident, and utterly devoid of anything resembling a soul. He was so sure of himself, so certain, that every man has a price. He thought he had me all figured out. And in that moment, something inside me, that same quiet nudge that made me stop on that highway, it solidified into pure, cold steel. I thought about Elena, her terror, her courage. I thought about the people trapped in his web of lies. And I thought about that whisper in the chapel. Go. It wasn't just a command. It was a mission. I leaned forward, my hands flat on his polished desk, and I pushed the envelope back towards him. "I might just be a trucker," I said, my voice low and steady, "but I know right from wrong. And what you're doing here, it's about as wrong as it gets." The preacher's smile didn't vanish. It tightened. The charm evaporated, revealing the cold, hard predator beneath. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes like chips of ice. "A shame," he said softly. "I really thought you were a reasonable man." He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the guard standing by the door. That was it. The deal was off the table. My life was about to end in a soulless office in the middle of the desert. The guard started to move towards me, and then all hell broke loose. The first sound was a crash, a sound of heavy glass shattering somewhere down the hall. Then came the shouting, muffled at first, then closer, clearer. "Police, state investigators. Open up." It was a raid. The journalist, he must have had a backup plan, a dead man's switch. If he didn't check in, he must have had a call go out too. The authorities who were already watching this place, just waiting for the piece of evidence they needed to move in. And we were that piece. The preacher's face went from smug confidence to pure, undiluted fury. Chaos erupted. Alarms started blaring. The guards who had been about to take me out were now scrambling, pulling out radios, shouting orders. From the hallway, I heard a pop, then another. Gunfire. The raid was turning violent. This was my chance. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this was the ultimate transformation, a final explosive pivot in this journey. This wasn't just about escape anymore. This was about justice. The impact of the raid was like a lightning strike, shattering the illusion of the preacher's power. The hidden truth of his operation was being dragged out into the light, kicking and screaming. This was the revelation he never saw coming. My mindset shifted for the last time. I wasn't a victim, a fugitive, or even a guardian anymore. I was a survivor, and I had to get us out of there. In the confusion, I lunged for the door. One of the guards tried to grab me, but I was a man running on pure adrenaline. I threw him off and burst into the hallway. It was madness. Men in tactical gear were shouting orders. Employees of the church were screaming and running for cover. I had to find Elena. I fought my way through the pandemonium, my only thought to get to her. I found her in a small side room, locked in with another guard. She had been fighting, a true warrior to the very end. The sounds of the raid gave us the opening we needed. We took the guard by surprise, and in the ensuing struggle, we managed to break free. We ran, hand in hand, through the maze of white. Corridors, the sounds of sirens and gunfire, our only guide. We were fighting our way out of the heart of the beast. Two ordinary people who had refused to back down, running towards the flashing red and blue lights that meant both salvation and the end of our ordeal. If you believe that good can still win, comment "I believe in the light" down below. We burst out of a side door and into a maelstrom of flashing lights, shouting men and barking dogs. It was overwhelming. A state investigator in a windbreaker grabbed me. Another one guided Elena away, and just like that, it was over. The adrenaline that had been keeping me going for the past day and a half evaporated, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. It was heavier than any load I'd ever carried. I remember being put in the back of a black sedan, the world outside the window a blur of organized chaos. I saw the preacher being led out in handcuffs, his face a mask of cold fury, the charm finally gone. I saw his men being lined up, their faces grim in the flashing lights. The empire was falling, and I had been there to see it happen. They didn't take me to a police station. They took me to a nondescript motel room miles away, a safe house. It was clean, sterile, and anonymous. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I was safe. But I didn't feel safe. I felt hollowed out. For hours I sat there, drinking the worst coffee I've ever had, while a rotating cast of investigators asked me questions. I told them everything. About seeing Elena on the side of the road, the roadblock, the chase, the journal, the chapel, the whisper on the CB, the confrontation in the preacher's office. I talked until my voice was raw, until the story didn't even feel like it belonged to me anymore. The TV in the corner of the room was on with the sound muted. I could see the live feed from the church compound. News vans had arrived. Reporters were speaking gravely into cameras. The headline crawling across the bottom of the screen was surreal. Faith and fraud. Prominent preacher arrested in massive corruption probe. I had done it. We had done it. The truth was out. Later, I saw Elena through the open doorway of another room. She was sitting at a table, speaking to a female detective. She wasn't the terrified victim from the highway anymore. She was calm, resolute, her voice steady as she laid out the facts. She had found her strength, her purpose. She was no longer running. She was fighting, and she was winning. I was no longer just a truck driver. I was a key witness in a federal case. My anonymity was gone. My old life was a ghost in the rearview mirror. An investigator, a kind man with tired eyes, came in and sat down across from me. He looked at me for a long moment. "You know you're a hero, Jack," he said. "You saved that woman's life. You brought this whole thing down." Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because his words, they didn't land right. Hero. The word felt cheap, hollow. The true impact of this journey wasn't a feeling of triumph. It was the crushing weight of the truth. This was the final, quiet transformation. It was the shift in my mindset from action to consequence. I had seen behind the curtain into the dark bastidors of a man's soul, and what I saw would be burned into my memory forever. The hidden truth was now public, but I was one of the few who knew the real texture of it, the smell of the fear, the coldness in the preacher's eyes. This journey had forced one revelation after another on me, and now, in the quiet of this room, the biggest revelation was how heavy the aftermath truly was. My decision to stop on that road had led to this. Justice was being served, but there was no joy in it, only a profound, soul-crushing weariness. I just felt the weight of all the lives he had ruined, the faith he had shattered, the ugliness I had witnessed. Hero? No. I was just the guy who saw it all. I was the man who now had to carry that knowledge for the rest of my days. If you understand? That victory can sometimes feel like a burden. Comment the weight of truth down below. Weeks later, I was back on the road. The feds had kept their word. My name was kept out of the papers, my identity protected. My truck, which had been impounded as evidence, was finally released back to me, looking exactly the same, still bearing a few faint scratches from its detour through the desert. I was hauling a load of something ordinary. I don't even remember what. Just another job, another highway stretching out before me under a vast, empty sky. From the outside, nothing had changed. I was the same man in the same truck driving the same kind of lonely road. But on the inside, everything was different. The world looked the same, but I was seeing it through new eyes. Before we parted ways, back at the safe house, Helena had pressed something into my hand. It was a small, simple wooden cross, whittled from a piece of desert wood. She told me it was what she had clung to in her darkest moments. "Keep it," she'd said. "You're the one on the road now. You'll need it more than I do." And now, weeks later, I pulled it from my pocket. It felt warm in my hand. I looped a small leather cord through it and hung it from my rearview mirror. It swung there gently, a silent, solitary guardian watching over the road ahead. It wasn't a statement of newfound religion. It was a reminder of a choice made on a lonely highway, of a promise kept, of a truth that I now carried with me everywhere I went. I used to drive these roads and see nothing but asphalt and mile markers. I saw a job to be done. Now I see the spaces in between. I see the shadows in the canyons and wonder what secrets they hold. The loneliness of the road doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels watchful. It feels alive with possibility, both good and bad. It's a strange thing to have your whole worldview cracked wide open. You can never quite put it back together the same way again. I finally understood that sometimes the most important cargo you carry isn't in the trailer. It's the one you carry in your heart. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this entire experience was a journey of profound personal transformation. The true, lasting impact wasn't the raid or the headlines. It was the quiet shift in my own mindset. I spent my whole life believing I was one kind of person, a simple man who followed the rules and stayed out of trouble. But that single decision to stop for a stranger triggered a series of revelations, not about the world, but about myself. I discovered a capacity for courage I never knew I possessed. I learned that the hidden truth of who we are often lies dormant, waiting for a crisis to call it out. The bastidors, the behind the scenes of my own character were laid bare. And what I found there was a man who, when pushed, would not break. A man who would choose the hard right over the easy wrong. This whole journey has taught me that the road of life is constantly presenting us with choices. Most of them are small and insignificant. Left turn or right turn. Stop for coffee or keep pushing on. But every now and then, the road presents you with a choice that is anything but small. A choice that will define who you are, what you stand for, and what your life will mean. It will be a choice between your safety and your conscience, between your comfort and your courage. You can choose to keep your eyes on the white lines, to stay in your lane and pretend you don't see the person stranded on the shoulder. Or you can choose to stop. You can choose to get involved. The road always provides a choice. You just have to be willing to take the turn. If this journey resonates with you, comment "I am on the journey too" down below. And if you made it to the end of this story, if you're still with me now after all those miles, it means this journey meant something to you too. It means you understand. Do me a favor and let me know you're here by commenting "I'm with you on this journey" down below. It's just a quiet way of letting me know we're not all alone out here on this road. If our time together connected with you, hitting that like button is a simple way of showing it, and it truly does mean a lot. And if these are the kinds of stories you believe are worth telling, the ones about the real choices that define us, then I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to the channel. That's what we do here. We travel these roads together. This journey doesn't have to end now. There's another story popping up on your screen right now that I think you'll appreciate. It explores a similar idea about what happens in the quiet moments long after a life-changing decision has been made. Go ahead and click on it, and I'll see you over on the next stretch of highway.